Hi everyone. This is my last course before completing my master's program. Throughout this journey, I have had the immense pleasure to have challenging conversations, to lean into important readings, to analyze, reflect, and critique, to build community of respect and reciprocity. I have mixed emotions about the quote-unquote end of this journey, as one consistent theme has been evident in every single course. There is no end. It is a lifelong journey of learning and unlearning. This final project's proposal goal is to continue to engage in active and continuous conversations with peers and colleagues. Here's a summary of my final project, Disrupting Dominant Discourses in Secondary Education. Schools and classrooms are an integral factor in the formation of students' identities. Teachers hold immense responsibility to use their platforms effectively that challenge the dominant discourses so all students, but especially minoritized or marginalized folks, are reflected in the teaching methodologies and content shared in a classroom. Analysis revealed that most post-secondary courses were designed to prepare teachers with pragmatic skills and personal awareness rather than to prepare them in accordance with the key principles of multicultural education, such as critical consciousness and a commitment to educational equity. The question becomes, what happens when education, quote unquote, stops? How does one continue the conversation in the spaces we occupy as service teachers? Therefore, this proposal attempts to address racism, systemic bias, microaggressions, colorblindness, current staff, and it requires ongoing learning and unlearning about the positionality to reflect best practice, culturally relevant, anti-oppressive pedagogies in classrooms. Both post-secondary and secondary are becoming more and more aware of the need for critical analysis. The question is, how does one move from awareness piece to an action piece? The purpose of this proposal is to do just that, to create a community of learners, to continually integrate anti-racist oppressive pedagogies in the classrooms by facilitating community and conversation. The purpose is to not only name the obstacles that further perpetuate dominant discourses, but to actively dismantle them through collaboration and conversation and utilization of best practice in our spaces. The big question of this proposal is, how does one continue to learn and unlearn anti-racist pedagogies in order to use the classroom space responsibly to empower and engage marginalized students? My desired outcome is that teachers will notice, name, and deconstruct systems of oppressions found within the field of education and in the spaces they occupy. Teachers will have access and connection to educators who support and challenge perspectives, offering space for future growth, evolution, and implementation of best practice that is ongoing and continuous. Teachers will deconstruct colonial narratives that will impact teaching practices, assessment strategies through indigenization and decolonizing their spaces. Through this study, I would gather service teachers who are interested in discussing and implementing best practice that empowers educators to continue to notice, name, and actively participate in anti-oppressive pedagogies in their spaces. This group was focused on collaborations, conversations, and actively engaging in discourse. Ideally, this group would meet monthly. Narratives of strategies used in our spaces, we would talk about opportunities for growth, and we would read, watch, engage in learning and creating discussion spaces that further the conversation and influence best practice. Essentially, I want the conversation to be continuous and ongoing. The method and methodologies that I would predominantly use is Indigenous research methodologies and the narrative research. The purpose for using Indigenous research methodologies is to create further Indigenous understanding and promoting its use and advocating for its legitimacy as a way of knowing. Secondly, narrative research focuses on the power of storytelling, but also analyzing the themes and perceptions evident in our personal and communal stories. Pairing the two together would allow for courageous conversations and opportunities for people to lean into the stories that surround them, but also analyze and critique them. The first important question we ask is why the issue and therefore why the need for the proposal. James states that racial incidents are treated as isolated individual problems and perpetuated largely by individuals with negative attitudes and ignorant of the cultural differences of racialized individuals. Through education, we can further unpack that notion is simply not true. We envision racism at the extreme forms, not the subtle biases, the acts of aggression, the minimizing of story, the microaggressions, the assumptions, and the deficit lens. Therefore, as a school community and as a group, we could further unpack those notions in our spaces. Once one can name the issue, it is important to move to purposeful action. Therefore, the concept of an empowering school culture and social structure is used to describe the process of restructuring the culture and organization of the school so the students from diverse racial, ethnic, and social class groups will experience educational equality and cultural empowerment. It is essential that we engage and understand that this is not a simple process. It requires further thinking through critical dialogue and political action. This group would do both of those things, dialogue and action. It would be grounded in Indigenous research methodologies utilizing anti-racist pedagogy structured by St. Denis. You will note on the side there are two pictures that shows what it recognizes and examines, and that would be the foundation to all the conversations that this group would have within its context. As stated at the beginning of this presentation, we know that educators have a profound responsibility to use our platforms responsibly. This proposal attempts to provide space and place for teachers to continue that conversation that is purposeful in action and engages students in meaningful ways. Teachers must actively work against dominant discourses in their spaces to create spaces of safety, inclusivity, and critical use of content so students and teachers have space and place to engage in culturally relevant pedagogy and work on their own personal critical awareness of the world that we occupy. This proposal helps teachers situate schooling within the context of a long history of struggles, contesting intersecting forms of institutionalized oppression to teach specific strategies to add to the repertoire that benefits all. As outlined by Dr. Love, teachers have the opportunity to model and teach using practices by becoming a co-conspirator, by showing accountability, by acknowledging the archaeology of self, by focusing on relationship and looking at system justification and how it impacts not only how we see the world, but how we teach it in our spaces. A quote by Dr. Maya Angelou has always grounded me in the work as an educator: do the best that you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better. This proposal offers space for critical, emancipatory vision of schooling that reframes the object of critique from our children to oppressive systems and allows us to engage in active, meaningful, and purposeful dialogue that further influences our classrooms. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this proposal. I look forward to putting it into action in the spaces that I occupy, knowing that the work, although the classes are done, is never done. Here's a list of my references that help influence the work. Thank you for your time.